Malulile, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Susuki. Coming up, what does the new Tongan Prime Minister's appointment mean for the country's democracy? Also, France ruled as not giving enough security to New Caledonia in 2024. And Fiji's health workforce crisis deepens. The election of a noble to lead Tonga's next government is raising concerns over the direction of the country's democracy. Lord Whakawhanua beat incumbent Prime Minister Dr. Aisake Eke, the only other nominee in Monday's vote for the top job. The country's 26 elected representatives cast ballots for the two candidates, with Whakawhanua winning 16 votes to 10. Our Tonga correspondent Kalafi Moala told me what Tongans can expect from Lord Whakawhanua's leadership.
Well, I think it seems like from the outset, from the beginning, based on his speeches and based on things he has done and people he's associated with, I think he's trying to unite the nation. And by that, he means that he being a noble, he needs to bring the nobles together, His Majesty and the people. You know, those are the three major entities that make up Tongan society. And I think he's set and committed that whatever pathway we're going to go into the future, we need those three elements or three entities to move together. And he's able to do that.
Just hearing him speak after the ballot from yesterday, it really does seem like he has a genuine desire to unify the nation. But what does his appointment as Prime Minister mean for Tonga's democracy?
Well, I think it's tremendous. We have had 15 years since the democratic reform, and since then we've had 5 prime ministers, and one of those prime ministers was a noble, the very first one, Lord Tuivakano, and now we have the second noble that has been elected to be prime minister, and it is in our constitution that anyone who's a member of parliament, any one of the 26 members can be elected as a prime minister. So I think it's part of the developing democracy that we have in Tonga. We have not, I must say that the last 15 years have been a struggle in so many issues, mostly leadership issues. But now we are in a crossroads where we need to move to the future, and the key thing is moving together. We need to bring His Majesty on board, bring the noble representations on board, as well as the people. And I think for Whanua, a noble representative is the one that can do that, because he's related to the royal family. He is a noble himself from Hapai and from Maufanga. And he's deeply rooted in terms of his relationship with his people. So he can do that.
Well, given that he's got those connections, familial connections with the Tongan royal family, what do you make of the criticisms that his leadership as Prime Minister signals that the power has gone back to the monarchy?
I don't think that the power has gone back to the monarchy. But one of the things that I think has been a struggle in our democracy here in Tonga is that we have not been able to work together. That the government, the elected government, haven't been able to really work closely together with the monarchy and work in unity with the nobility in parliament. So I think that's a part of our democratic development that needed to happen. But it has not happened. And that's part of the problems I think we've had. I don't think the answer is that handing power back to the monarchy, because I don't think the monarchy wants that. It was the monarchy 15 years ago that actually took the initiative to really bring about the reform, handing their power to appoint government or to appoint the prime minister to parliament. And I don't think the way for Tonga anyway is to go back to that. We're not going back to that. But we need to make adjustments because there's still people here in Tonga that felt that the democracy we're supposed to be is basically to isolate the king, move him out of the way, like it is in the Westminster system. Just make him to be a figurehead rather than a governor that helped to bring check and balance. And I think that's part of our democracy that we need to really see work out and develop. Yeah. Having a democratic change doesn't mean that we put the king aside. He's very much a part of our society. He's the father of our nation. And then the nobles, to put them into a place of irrelevance, no, they're the biggest landowners in Tonga, and they're chiefs among our people. Many of them live in villages, and people are connected with them. So I think the key, we haven't been able in the last 15 years to work together out those three elements. But here's our opportunity to do that. And I think everyone is very sympathetic to see that happen.
What about the general population in Tonga? What do they make of Lord Whakawhanua's appointment? Despite the low voter turnout, I'm sure there's been some reactions. What are you hearing?
Yes, definitely. The reaction, of course, is coming from what we call the diehard Democrats. Usually the people that really believe that the reform and the changes that needs to take place in Tonga is basically giving power to the people, basically sidelining His Majesty or the royal family as well as the nobility. I think that can work in a Western social system, but in a Tongan system where family relationships is such a part of our daily lives. The king is not just the king. He is the father of our nation. Many of us are related to him in blood. And the nobility is not just the ones that are there to carry out the king's services. They are blood relations with a lot of our population. So despite there is those that are vocal against having a noble become the prime minister, I think it's a weak noise, because, for example, the main Democratic Party is no longer a major force. None of their representatives was elected into Parliament, which shows you that there has been a lot of changes in that regard. So most people that are in representatives in Parliament are basically who are there not because they're part of a party or pushing a particular ideology, but they're there on their individual merit. And that's why I think Whakawhanua was able to get the majority, because there are people that are there in Parliament for the first time, I believe, in 15 years. They're there on their own individual merit, and they're wanting to work together for the nation.
New Caledonia's administrative tribunal has ruled that France was responsible for not providing a reasonable level of security during the civil unrest that devastated the territory in 2024. The insurance company Allianz and 14 of its clients took the matter to the tribunal. They ruled that the French state should pay the insurance company a fine of over $33 million in compensation. Our French Pacific correspondent, Patrick de Cloyter, joins me now. Patrick, this is a huge landmark ruling.
Yes, no doubt. It's a landmark ruling because since the riots in New Caledonia broke out in May 2024, over 1.5 years ago, it's the first time that such a matter has been brought to a court in Noumea. And this matter was revolving around the notion of responsibility on the part of the French state during those riots, and its responsibility and duty to provide security and protection to the population. It doesn't mean that France was actually responsible for the riots, but it means it has failed to provide the appropriate security setup to prevent those riots from degenerating and all the consequences that followed. In fact, if we come back to those days of May 2024, the court ruled that there were not enough police and gendarmes deployed to contain what was later called an insurrection. And it was despite ample warning coming from the French High Commission in Noumea, which is the local representative of the French state. If you remember, at the time, France was also preparing to host the Olympic Games, and the highest priority was placed on keeping as many police and law enforcement staff in mainland France. What followed in New Caledonia, and especially in the Greater Noumea, was that hundreds of businesses were looted and burnt down, not to mention the 14 people who died, total damage in excess of 2 billion euros, and hundreds, if not thousands of people losing their jobs. This also resulted in hundreds of companies suffering huge damage and shutting down because of the destruction.
Who took the action to the tribunal?
In some cases, some companies were properly insured, not all of them, but those who were claimed their damages with their insurance companies. So in fact, it was the insurance companies, in this case Alliance, who turned against the French state and claimed compensation because they believed the French state had failed its responsibility to maintain law and order. And the claim, of course, was that when these events took place in May 2024, at the height of the riots, the law enforcement setup at the time was clearly outnumbered and overwhelmed. And it took several days for Paris to realize the extent of the insurrection and send reinforcements, which took several days to finally arrive in Noumea.
What was the tribunal's ruling, and where now from here?
The Administrative Tribunal of New Caledonia clearly ruled the French state had failed its responsibility to provide sufficient law and order means, and that therefore it was liable to pay, in this case, a first batch of 14 companies that were all insured with the same company, and in this case it means a total amount of over 28 million euros. That's over 30 million US dollars. At this stage, France has not appealed the ruling, but it still has the right to do this within 2 months.
It's been well over a year since the May 2024 riots. How are things economically in the French territory?
Definitely the time is not favourable and highly uncertain for New Caledonia. It's believed those riots actually cost a drop of 13.5% for the GDP to the economy. New Caledonia is still trying to reduce its expenses without putting too much burden on the taxpayers because they simply cannot afford to pay tax for the time being. And of course, this has got a real impact on New Caledonia's revenues, while the French territory is trying to finalize its budget before the end of this year. That means the end of this month. In the meantime, at the French national level, the French government is also trying to finalize its own budget, and parts of that budget are actually concerning New Caledonia, even though recently the French PM Sébastien Lecornu has mentioned a sort of Marshall Plan to relaunch New Caledonia's economy, a package of 2.2 billion euros over a 5-year period for New Caledonia. That also depends on whether the French budget will eventually gather enough votes in this climate of high political instability with no clear majority in parliament. That means that at every level, New Caledonia's financial situation is far from stable, and its economic future remains obviously more than fragile, especially as businesses are finding it very difficult to subscribe new insurances because simply the insuring companies are refusing to include the riots risk from any new policies. And meanwhile, the price of insurance premiums has also drastically increased.
A new report says Fiji's health workforce is being hit hard by regional labour mobility schemes. The report by the Australia Institute says the health workforce crisis across the region is deepening as people leave for jobs in Australia and New Zealand. Kaya Selby spoke with its author, Fiona MacDonald.
The problems that we're concerned with, there's always been an issue of brain drain, where skilled health workers will migrate to other countries where there's better opportunities, and higher pay, we're concerned with the active recruitment of skilled health workers into lower skilled jobs. So they come with aspirations. We've seen registered nurses, for example, come with aspirations to work eventually as nurses in Australia and in New Zealand. New Zealand has some pathway opportunities, although they're not fantastic for people to get recognition of qualifications in those circumstances. So that a nurse leaving a Pacific Island country will be able to, use their skills and be paid appropriately. But what we're seeing in Australia in particular, and also a bit in New Zealand, is they're not getting recognised. So we're taking skilled health workers from health systems in the Pacific that are really struggling with staffing and workforce, as well as with systems generally because of lack of funding. That we're encouraging them to come here, but yet not enabling them to even use their skills and work to the level that they've been trained and to be paid appropriately. So traditionally, brain drain's been about workers going to work elsewhere in their own roles, and that's every individual's right to do that. Our concern is that what we're seeing is this recruitment of people and de-skilling. We're de-skilling our Pacific Island health workers while leaving them with the brain drain problem.
So what can we actually do about it?
Well, I think there's two things. First, several things. The Australian and New Zealand governments have, specific Pacific labour migration policies, as well as they have partnerships in the Pacific around development. The way that policy is implemented and developed and implemented in relation to our relationships with the Pacific seem to be very siloed. So on the one hand, you've got Australia and New Zealand competing for, care workforces, competing to get competing internationally to address their care workforce skills shortage problems. But on the other hand, they've got agreements to support the Pacific Islands development, and we need better policy coherence. So that's one really important thing. Another thing is if we're recruiting, whether they're overskilled or not, when we're recruiting Pacific Island people to come, particularly on temporary visas to our countries, we need to actually have much better oversight over how those workers are treated and the jobs that they're in. We know that both in New Zealand and Australia, work in aged care and in home and community health can be very difficult work, that's low paid work comparatively, to other jobs in our countries, that offers very problematic working hours arrangements. And we also know that migrant workers in those jobs do suffer racism and discrimination. So we need better oversight because temporary workers or workers on temporary visas are very vulnerable because they're at the subject. They're not able to kind of freely move within the labour market the same way that local resident workers are. So we need, both Australian and New Zealand governments need to work harder to ensure that migrant workers, particularly under Pacific schemes, are not exploited. The third thing I think is that Pacific Island governments need to maintain their workforces, and that's something that the Australian and New Zealand governments should also be supporting them to do, to offer training to ensure that workers are not working in the dire circumstances that they are and that we are contributing to by taking away their skilled workers, which makes it really difficult for workers to stay in those systems. So we need better ways to between governments to work out systems for translation of training, recognition of qualifications across countries, so that and ways to make it easier for workers to go back.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. For myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā, soifua.